What's wrong with you people?
Welcome to Not Another Baptist Podcast. And if you are looking for theological education that includes both academic challenge and hands-on ministry experience, we suggest Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. Wherever God calls, Southwestern Seminary wants to help you get there. And the best way to experience SWBTS is to attend its spring preview day on March 31st. See firsthand all that Southwestern Seminary has to offer. During your visit, you'll tour the campus, speak with faculty, chat with students, and experience the unique campus community of Southwestern Seminary. Register today or find out more at swbts.edu/preview. Kyle, we are about to embark on a mass recording because you've got some stuff going on. When you're back, I will be gone to Orlando, Florida, maybe for our annual pilgrimage to the happiest place on earth,
the wokest place on earth,
where dreams come true. I don't know what the slogan is now. I think it's where dreams come true, but really it's where Matt's bank account goes to die. But that's 3 weeks from now, 2 weeks from now. I don't know. That's a while. That's going to be in March. I'm going to get to be with Clint Ellis, a friend of the podcast. I'm going to preach at his church, and hopefully he doesn't get fired for that. And then we will spend 3 days at Disney, 2 days at Universal. We actually prefer, the girls and I prefer Universal. Rebecca is all about the Disney. And so we're looking forward to a little time away. But Kyle, how are you doing before we dive in?
Yeah, doing well. As you mentioned, getting ready for a busy week and really a busy couple of months, just with some trips and travel. And one of those, I get to come hang out with you for a couple of days, I think, and something that we're doing in the Dallas area. And so, yeah, it's going to be fun, but very busy. So, yeah, we are. So if by the end of like the next 3 weeks, you're like, man, these guys seem really tired, because we've recorded like 3 or 4 episodes in a row, which we used to do on a regular basis. When we first started this thing, like you would come to my office in Alamogordo and we would sit down and we would hammer out 3 or 4 episodes. It's been a while since we've done that.
It's true, because I don't have to go to Walmart in your town. And so what we would do is I would drop Rebecca off at Walmart. She would go get our groceries, and that would give us about an hour to knock out 4 or 5 episodes and then hope that we put them in order when we uploaded them. That was also back when you edited them. And I'm sure the sound was much better back then, because I don't have the same skills that you do. But it's good to see you, man. And we're going to we've been in the middle of this whole Why Churches Die series. And got a lot of great feedback from that. But one of the ones that we recently discussed was kind of discipleship, transformed behavior versus transformed lives. And there's a follow-up on the blog by Bob Bickford about raising the level of discipleship in a declined church. So we're not really stopping the Why Churches Die. We want to give maybe some encouragement if you've kind of been like, man, they're just beating me up about my dying church. We want to maybe give you a little hope today on some ways you can raise the level of discipleship in a declined church as part of this series. And then we will continue looking at the rest of some of these 7 reasons why churches die, and hope that they've been helpful to you along the way. So Kyle, you're the one that told me about this blog and or this article, because it's a follow-up to our 4th episode on focusing on transformed behavior, not transformed hearts or transformed lives, that kind of deal. And so one of the things that we find as revitalization consultants or replanting consultants or associational missionary or whatever, when I go into these churches that are declining, plateauing, or even just flat out dying, we usually find a common denominator in most of them. You don't typically find a dying church with just thriving spiritual vitality among their entire membership. usually you're going to find spiritual maturity that's kind of lacking, or maybe they're just dying on the vine. And one of the things that we see is no matter how old they may not be old spiritually, and at least haven't been plugged into that as well over the years. And so maybe that's kind of gotten off track for whatever reason. Pastors come and go, or they're not, whatever. I mean, the list could be limitless. And so maybe the saints are faithful, they're coming, they're giving, the church is still there. So they're there, but they haven't really been transformed by the power of the gospel, and really maybe don't have much of a desire to see the lost reached or whatever it may be. And naturally, the church is going to struggle because of it. And so, what this really boils down to is deficient discipleship. Thinking that, hey, if the pastor just preaches a sermon every week, that's all I need to grow in my faith. And that's a part of growing in your faith. Just like having a meal throughout the week is important to surviving too. But you also need that daily nourishment and the daily food and all of that. And so we're going to talk about that. Number one is maybe some reasons why this is the case. And so that number one is an emphasis on belief over being transformed, an emphasis on belief over being transformed, right? Having right doctrine, having right thinking, all that kind of stuff, but not necessarily being transformed. Let's talk about that, Kyle. Kick us off.
Yeah, so I think there can be a misconception that if you just believe the right thing, so if your theology is good, if your doctrine is good, that will lead to a transformed life. And that's just not the case, right? For one thing, I think because um, if you believe that, there's there's something askew in your doctrine. It's important to believe the right things, but that does not equate with being transformed by the Holy Spirit, right? And that's why that can lead to really cold theology, really cold doctrine, where you might be able to write a solid 45-page theological defense of the Trinity, but you're not loving your neighbor well. And we have to ask which of these things is the most important, right? Which of these things impacts the world for the sake of the gospel? It's not that your theology is unimportant. Don't hear me say that. But if your theology does not lead you to love God and love others, if it doesn't lead you to be transformed, then something's wrong.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say I'm probably not going to be able to write a 45-page treatise or treatise on the Trinity without some semblance of a mistake in there. So I'm just going to say it. It's probably possible, but yeah, I think you're right. Number two is a rejection of pastoral authority, and we're going to add in a caveat here. Of course, is this isn't saying that, hey, pastor's always right. Bow down before him. He is your king. He is your pope. Like that is not what we're saying. But at the same time, Hebrews does exhort us to obey those who keep watch over our souls. And so there is a necessary component of submission to pastoral authority. And so let's talk about that one, Kyle.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, this is not if someone disagrees with you on something, that does not mean that they're rejecting pastoral
Yes, it
authority.
does. Yes. Yes, it does.
Okay, so if they don't agree with you on every single point and don't immediately get in line with whatever whim of leadership you have, no, that what we're talking about here is a pattern, right? Where they're consistently fighting against everything, right? Whether that's, I mean, even down to you decide to preach through the book of John, and somebody is just incensed that you're not preaching through Luke, right? Well, you shouldn't be preaching that to us. You should be preaching, or even, Pastor, I don't know why you just get up and walk through books of the Bible. That's not what we need, right? We need you to tell us how to fix problems in our lives. Those kind of things are rejecting pastoral authority, right? And again, it's not disagreeing with you about a leadership decision. It's undermining leadership at every single point. And there's a difference in that. And yeah, I mean, oftentimes in a church that's thriving, that's growing, that's baptizing folks, you're not going to find this. This happens, I think, primarily in dying and declining churches because where there's nothing to celebrate, folks will find something to fight about. Right. That's just the nature of of humanity, I'm afraid.
Yeah, and I've said this before and said it many times in the pulpit, and if we've got a church member that's listening to this, you don't get the pastor that you expect. You don't get the pastor that you even necessarily voted for. You get the pastor that you pray for. And one of the best ways that you can submit to that pastoral authority is just put them before God. Just ask God to bless them, to help them, and then come alongside them and do the same. Bless them and help them yourself. And that's one of the best ways you can get it. Instead of just criticizing the dude and tearing them down for preaching through Luke instead of, whatever political thing is going on of that day, maybe come alongside and help them and pray for them. And then that leads us to the third one is failing to die to self. Failing to die to self. And because this is something we hear often, my church, and there's nothing wrong with saying my church. We say First Farmersville is our church. It's, we go there. It's our church, but we want to be careful when that is also equating ownership. It's my church because I run it. I pay the bills here. I pay the bills here, so you're going to do what I want to do. That kind of thing. For those of you that at this point maybe you're planning to go see the Jesus Revolution, you're going to see there's. I put on Twitter, trigger warning for pastors. I don't think this spoils anything in the movie, but when the pastor, I guess the founder maybe of Calvary Chapel, I'm not exactly sure, but he is the pastor of Calvary Chapel in this movie, and he starts welcoming in the hippies into the church, and the deacon body's not too thrilled about it. And they're like, we pay the bills here and you're going to run off the wrong people, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, oh man, trigger warning for the pastors because we've heard it. It's our church. It's my church. I own this thing. And that is counter to the call that we have to die to ourselves. Talk about that, Kyle.
Yeah. And as you said, it's not wrong to say, this is my church. I think, we want people to identify and to claim some level of ownership, right? In their church. We want them to be really involved in the local church. The problem is where, as you mentioned, you become so entrenched in that you think everyone should do exactly what you want, right? And again, and oftentimes in churches where things are happening, people are being baptized, folks are being saved, they're on mission. These things don't pop up, I don't think, as often as when it's dying and declining, because then you can get folks that are just like in this death grip of, well, you're not going to change this in my church. And I would rather, we've heard this before. I would rather see our church die than ... In the case of Chuck Smith, maybe it was, we'd rather see our church die than reach these people, right? Than have these people come in. And so there has to be a dying to self that says, my preferences are not ultimate here. What's ultimate is the gospel going forth and seeing lives changed. And you mentioned the Jesus Revolution. I had a hard time with this one in the beginning because I had a hard time buying Pastor Fraser Crane. So if you're a Kelsey Grammer fan, he played Fraser Crane for 20 something years.
Fun fact: he got saved.
I heard you say that.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think I get the story correct. And I could miss this. This is a major rabbit trail real quick. But so he is going to a Lori, crusade or whatever it is. And he's up in like one of the private suites because, he's doing like, I guess, research for the film or whatever. But Lori does this whole thing, does the invitation, and the director of the movie is with him, suddenly looks over to talk to him, and he's gone. They don't know where he is. And they see him, he's walking down to go to the invitation. And so he's like, I don't know what to do with this. Like, A-list celeb down there in the middle of the sea of people. So he goes down, and at the same time, he's like, I don't want to screw up his eternal life. I need to find like the best pastor to go and talk to him. He gets saved. And as I understand it, he's now teaching like Bible studies and doing all of this kind of stuff back in Hollywood. And so it's a neat little story too of people that got saved during the making of this movie. Yeah. Actors and actresses and all that kind of stuff.
Can you imagine you're a 25-year-old guy who's youth pastor who's been trained as a counselor for this Greg Laurie crusade, and all of a sudden you look up and here comes Kelsey Grammer walking up to you. And now look, all right, he's a human. He's a sinner in need of grace like anyone else, but that would be a little what do I do?
Yeah. So
I can't wait until 2030 at the SBC meeting when Pastor Kelsey Grammer comes up to the microphone to make a motion. It's gonna be fantastic. Love it. Can't wait.
That is if the rest of this stuff is kept in mind. There are 5 reasons that changing the culture of discipleship in the local church can occur, but it is going to be hard. We're not going to dig into each of these. We're going to put the link in the show notes. I want you to read this and take some time with it, which leads us into the first few. Number 1 is discipleship isn't linear. It's not just from point A to point B when you're born or reborn. And then when you die, just this wonderfully smooth line to glory. There's going to be some ups and downs, twists and turns, highs and lows, all of that kind of stuff. And that also means that discipleship takes time and requires patience. That's number 2 and 3. It takes time, right? They're not going to be Billy Graham tomorrow. They may not be Billy Graham next year. And they may not be Billy Graham this side of glory. But it takes time. And because of that, we need patience. And he quotes R.C. Sproul, "What's wrong with you people?" in there, which begins and ends our podcast every week. But it's one of those things that, he notes that Jesus probably thought this too, even his disciples who are with him every single day are just not getting it. But he had patience with them. And as that learner, that disciple grows and struggles, regresses, progresses, and everything else, have patience. And in order for that to happen, discipleship requires a relationship, right? This isn't something you're just going to do from the pulpit. It's not going to be top down. It's going to be over a coffee table, in people's living rooms, all of that kind of stuff. And that final one is it requires a plan and strategy. Let's briefly touch on this one, Kyle. Discipleship requires a plan. It's, if you plan to fail, you can fail to plan. You can plan to fail. That's it. I don't even have a plan to get the quote right. So why does discipleship require a plan and strategy?
Yeah, so you've probably been in those discipleship meetings where you have something that you would like to talk about, and yet your disciplee, is jumping just from topic to topic, right? Because so you need a plan. You need this week, or at least for this season, we're going to talk about these things. The next season, we're going to talk about these things, right? Whether that's a week, a month, whatever. You need a strategy to help move people along, because if not, you can get bogged down in not unimportant things, but things that are not going to help them grow, right? But much like in a church, if your leadership style is characterized by just putting out fires, you're never going to get anything accomplished. It's the same with discipleship. If you're just focusing on putting out whatever fires are popping up in this person's life all the time and never giving them tools to grow in their faith and address so they can have some tools to address fires when they come up in their life without constantly having you on speed dial. It requires time, and as you already mentioned, it's messy, but there does need to be a strategy and a process. And there's all kinds of tools out there. Find one that works for you and your church culture and with the folks that you're working with. And don't be tied to that, right? So don't say, oh, well, this is 12 weeks, so we have to start here and end at 12 weeks. And you have some flexibility in that, but you have to have a plan in order to help people grow.
Yep. May that plan include preaching the gospel, warning and teaching, and understand that the goal is maturity for everyone in Christ, regardless of their age. It's going to be hard, but it's worth it. And we encourage you to make sure that you're raising the level of discipleship in your churches, because you're not going to find a whole lot of dying and declining churches that are filled with just thriving spiritually members. And maybe they're out there, but more often than not, it's because that has kind of been on the back burner, because as Kyle said, we've been focusing on just putting out fires, whatever it might be. Kyle, send us out.
Hey, thanks for listening. And until next time, may your coffee be as black as night and as bold as the gospel you declare.
What's wrong with you people?